Some of the things I've been reading over the last 3-4 weeks, job losses. So if we leave the EU, there's going to be astronomical job losses. What's your view on that?
Well, the figures, I think you've got to understand where these numbers come from. When a company like ours makes its returns, then the statistical information on there about what percentage of our business is exports to the EU, outside of the EU, how many people we employ in whatever department, whether that's admin down to the shop floor, and those numbers are extrapolated. So anyone who's even raised an invoice for an export to the EU will be included in those numbers. But with all of the distributors we have, both inside Europe and outside of Europe, and of course we have distributor agreements. These are legal agreements that we've made with those companies in the European Union. They're legally binding, and trade will continue on the 24th of June, and it will do, for the foreseeable future, because nobody in the business world wants to be in breach of a contract. So, the notion that all these jobs will instantly be lost is just pure fallacy. And of course, there are more people employed by European companies that export into the UK, and the job losses on the other side of the channel could be exponentially greater. So nobody's going to risk those jobs. It's not politically viable either in this country or in the EU countries, for that matter.
At the moment, obviously, trading within the European Union, we've got access to the 500 million people. Should we leave? How is that going to suit? So, do we still have access to those 500 million?
Well, I think we need to just put that 500 million people into perspective, and of course it's soon to become probably 600 million people with Turkey and other countries joining the European Union. Now, as a businessman, one of the first things that I need to assess is whether my customers have got money to pay for my goods, whether they can raise finance, whether they can raise credit, and those are really important things. So if we look at the EU at the moment, there are countries that have a strong economy where they can raise finance, where they can afford to pay for our goods and services, and then there are other countries, particularly in the southern European area, where quite frankly they don't have disposable income to buy our goods. They can't raise credit because of the mistakes made within the Eurozone with the European currency, the euro. So of these 500 million people, if we look at the population of Germany, that's a country that's worth dealing with. The Netherlands, Belgium, for instance. Not so Greece, not so Spain, not so Portugal, not so Italy. And so of that 500 million people, I would say 250 of them are worth trading with. 250 million people is the realistic size of the market. Those are the people who've got the money, who can raise finance, who can buy our goods and services. Now, when we compare that with Commonwealth countries and the English-speaking nations in the world, that's a market of 400 million people. And so we're talking about Australia, which is wealthy. We're talking about the United States, which is incredibly wealthy, and so on and so forth. So the potential market outside the EU is almost double the potential market inside the EU, in my opinion.
So there is an argument that should we leave the EU and trade becomes easier, there will be more jobs because there will be more exported.
Yeah, I believe there will be, in the long term, more jobs rather than less jobs.
Okay, now obviously staying jargon free, TTIP. Can you explain what TTIP is?
Well, TTIP is a transatlantic trade agreement that's brokered between the European Union and the United States, and it's an interesting arrangement by which initially the negotiations began in 2013, and they began with the European Union placing a 30-year secrecy bill on all of the negotiations, so it wasn't for the dissemination to the general public, and so we can thank Greenpeace for leaking 2/3 of the documents, and it's good that they did, because now we can see the true complexion of TTIP. And I think you've got to look at the whole thing with a clearer focus. When we joined the common market in the early 70s, then we were told it was going to be a common market. What we weren't told is that this was going to lead to a European Union that would have its own flag, its own military, and remove power from the sovereign states. And if we'd been told that, only a few years after the Second World War, then there's no way on earth that people would have voted for it in 1973. And so TTIP is a little bit like that. We're not being told about it. We're not being told that if we remain, this is what's going to happen in the European Union over the next 5 or 10 years. The Remain side are just as guilty as not really giving a clear view of the picture, even though the future is more known to them than it is for the Leave side. So they should be able to say, well, we're going to enter into this agreement with the United States, which means that large corporate organisations will have the power to sue sovereign nations if they act in a way which doesn't suit big corporate America. And this, of course, puts the National Health Service at risk, and as well as other institutions. And that's something we really need to be concerned of. If there's one great achievement in this country, it is the National Health Service. When you visit countries that don't have a National Health Service and you see how people are having to deal with health issues, then we can come back to the UK and be very grateful that we have this great service in this country. And that's what we need to be defending at all cost.